We're continuing the conversation on surveillance, security and privacy with members of our HuffPost Live community. Joining us in the Google Hangout is Brandon Bryce from New York City, Egberto Willies from Kingwood, Texas, Jeanette Bennett from Orem, Utah, Sabrina Vavulius from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Welcome to everyone. So you've been watching this conversation on why Americans supposedly don't care about privacy. Want to hear what you have to say. Brandon, let's start with you. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's an interesting conversation. I first want to say I think we've got a major issue when we're talking about a violation of the First and Fourth Amendment towards our U.S. Constitution. I think the issue when we're talking about security is that, of course, we need security. I believe in privacy to an extent, but I think the problem goes back to the Patriot Act. And unfortunately, even though it was passed under Bush, I think in the upcoming months and years, we are going to see the revision and the revisiting of the U.S. Patriot Act to say, what is the extent that we're willing to actually offer to be secure in our society? And going a step further, I think I will say that I also agree that Edward Snowden is a hero, but I think the issue is that he didn't quite understand the proper chain of command, and that is bring it, instead of putting it out and blasting it in the media, instead he should have actually taken it to the officials, to the appropriate officials, and actually getting a congressional.
But Brandon, were you not watching when we just spoke to Thomas about this and what happened to him as a result of this? Or, for example, what happened to Manning? Even though
I understand that. I understand that, but I also think the sad part about it is that you don't throw out this type of information into the media and then run to China. I don't think that was in the best interest of the country, and I don't unfortunately think that's in the best interest of the American people.
But maybe he ran to China because he doesn't want to face the same consequences that Bradley Manning faced, which included, according to Ernesto Mendez of the UN Special Reporter for Torture, that he was treated inhumanely, degradingly. He was put in solitary confinement, and more importantly, that he was forced to strip down naked when he was in there, and all these things that are going to arguably be used or could be used by Snowden to argue that he should be protected wherever he is.
Interestingly, by the way, Ed Snowden said in his statement when he was interviewed by Laura Poitras and Glenn Greenwald, "I am not here to hide from justice. I am here to reveal criminality."
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Egberto, I'd love to hear what you
like China is
I'd love to hear what your thoughts are, Egberto.
Yep.
What do you think about what he said, Brandon said? I'm curious.
Ahmed would spend the next hour and a half just debating with Brandon, but we've got to move on. Egberto, what your thoughts?
Unfortunately, I'm going to be out of context with my normal positions in saying that I think he's a very poor messenger for a very important issue. Because I think what happened is, and not only that, I think for those of us that are in the liberal base, I think we've chosen the wrong bandwagon to jump on when we use this particular guy, because I don't particularly think he may have some information, but I think given the information that I've seen so far, and I do program and I do software, a lot of what he said so far is not realistic or viable. Now, when it comes to the real issue, I think the real issue, in fact, is security and privacy. And I really think, as Brandon just said, that we really have to have a discussion on how much privacy do we want to give up for allowing these people to get involved in these issues. But I want to take a quick step back. I think the media is a bit complicit in this, and I'm not talking about our gentle lady here who has a program on Pacifica that I love, but I think the media is complicit in under-reporting what should have been reported that could have formed whatever type of covert actions that we have. But I think because they hadn't done their jobs, these things were allowed to run away all these years.
Right.
But this occurred in 2006 now.
Egberto, you and Janine Gibson, the editor of The Guardian, would agree that the media is to blame in part. Jeanette, what do you think? I know we've had you on several times around similar issues. What are your thoughts on this?
Right. Well, the Constitution was written in the 18th century with 18th century technologies and 18th century media. It's a completely different world now, and that's what we're trying to figure out. I think one of the problems with the media right now is that we tend to seek out media that supports the opinions that we already have. So the media used to play the watchdog role, and when I went through journalism school, we talked about the fourth estate and being the watchdog. That's not really working anymore. The media is by and large very biased and very narrow in its opinion. And we tend to seek out those who agree with us, and it becomes a very dangerous thing for our community. I think as a society, we largely give up our privacy. We have engaged in social media like crazy. We tell people where we are, who we're with, what we think, what brands we like. And we tend to be very open, and that might be one reason that we're not overly concerned with this potential privacy breach.
Perhaps, Jeanette, but
I think it's also important to remember that's information you want to share. That's what people are used to, and it's a much looser, livelier conversation.
That's right. Not to mention, and Hani, I'd love to hear your thoughts about what you're hearing as well, because every time someone says, look, we give up all of our privacy all the time anyway, I'm on Facebook all the time. Yeah, Facebook doesn't control 101st Airborne. Facebook doesn't control Guantanamo Bay, okay?
Well, I think that's a great point. It's, you know, and I think there's something that we have to keep in mind, and that is privacy is not a one-size-fits-all thing. It's not either you have it or you don't have it. You have varying degrees of privacy. Information you may share with your wife or husband is not necessarily the same type of information you're going to share with your coworker, for example. But the problem is we tend to lump it all together, and that's just simply not the case. And I think the second point is a really strong one, which is there's a big difference between knowingly and you know, making a decision to say, I'm going to check in my location on Facebook and let people know that I'm at this restaurant or at this sporting event or whatever. But it's a completely different thing altogether to say, I'm going to let the government preemptively know everything I'm doing or saying or where I am at any given moment and trust that they, you know, it's for a good purpose of national security. We have to step away from that kind of false dichotomy that we either have to have privacy or we have to have security. We can have both, and we should have both, and we should insist that our government protects both. Well, and the way to do that is to uphold the laws that have limited the way the government can collect data and search data about us.
Certainly, if you believe, for example, that free societies are more robust in the long run than dictatorial societies, then there's no conflict. But Sabrina, I'd love to hear what you think about all this.
Well, you know, I grew up in Guatemala during the armed internal conflict, so I feel really strongly about this because, I mean, they too at that time felt a threat. It wasn't the threat of terrorism, it was the threat of communism, and everything became interpreted that way. And this associative sort of guilt by association and jigsawing of your life, so to fit you into whatever the current paradigm of fear is one of the things that really scares me about this. And I was actually laughing earlier when you were saying, you know, that I'm not going to be hysterical about it, and I was typing in, I will be, you know, because these are surely these are the first steps in a very slippery slope. I mean, it's very easy, it seems to me, to give up civil liberties because we trust our government and feel like that nothing bad can happen. And I'm sitting here as a journalist and as somebody who grew up outside of the United States, wondering, asking on my Facebook timeline, why aren't people more upset about this? And people keep telling me, oh, because, you know, it's a matter of weight, convenience against this. And
this is such an important issue that Sabrina is raising. I mean, if she grew up in Guatemala, she is there. I mean, we just saw the trial of Efraín Ríos Montt, the dictator from 1982, who was responsible for the deaths of how many tens of thousands of people. But that tracking of dissidents, you know, it all depends where we come from, what our experience is. But I think if we have a serious discussion in this country about privacy, the stuff we don't want to share, people will overwhelmingly be deeply concerned about what the government knows, especially with the power imbalance.
Of course, and you know, one thing we haven't discussed yet is the perception abroad. I mean, obviously this has sparked a debate, you know, amongst citizens abroad in countries where the majority of customers of these social media companies, of these top internet companies, are living overseas, and of course they're implicated in this as well.
It's hard to hold carry the mantle of being the shining beacon of democracy and freedom when it turns out that you're doing stuff like like this. But Brandon, Egberto, Jeanette and Sabrina, thank you so much for joining us. The conversation, of course, will continue. People are conversing online. Wise Up Movement says on Twitter it's unnecessary, not to mention a violation of Fourth Amendment rights, to surveil all US citizens. Linda Sedluska says, has social media lowered our expectations of privacy? 420 for Peace says, I'm on the fence. There needs to be boundaries set in stone. Thanks to all for joining us. Coming up next, whistleblowing and journalism after Prism.